Ado, come on down. Mr. Mayor, Commissioners, thank you for having me this evening. Mitch Brigulio with Davenport and Company. We serve as financial advisor to the town. I know, sorry, this is right in my face. I know we've talked a number of times about various topics, including, financing options in North Carolina, municipal finance overview in North Carolina, talk specifically about the town, your existing debt profile, your cash flows to repay debt service, fund balance, debt capacity, debt affordability, the idea of looking at potential debt policies in the future. We've covered a lot of topics, but we thought tonight in talking with staff it would be helpful just to keep this at a very high level and provide a refresher on the capacity that you all have right now to fund capital projects through debt issuance if you choose to go that route. Through the years that we've talked about these potential debt issuances, we've worked on a financing plan to help preserve capacity for future debt issuance and preserve the cash flow to pay for debt service if you choose to go that route. The steps that you all have taken as part of your budget have given you that capacity. You all have done a really good job of working on the budget, looking at the budget, and including the funds, setting aside the funds in the capital reserve and continuing to make your capital reserve transfer, which gives you a lot of flexibility. I know as the Parks Master Plan comes to fruition, as you look to finalize that, as you think about projects within that plan that you want to fund, you have options, and debt funding is one of those options should you choose to do that. You have minimal debt outstanding right now, so when we think about what we tend to call debt capacity, looking at a couple of key ratios compared to others, debt to assessed value, for example, your debt as a percentage of your tax base, you're in really good shape. You have no issues with the debt capacity from that perspective. For you all and for most, the limiting factor is what we call debt affordability, the dollars that you have available to pay debt service. And again, you all have done a really good job as part of your budgets of making the tough and good decisions to set funds aside to be in a position to fund capital projects if you choose to do that. So I thought it would be helpful, I think you all have this one pager in front of you, and thought it would be helpful just at a very high level to look at this chart on the bottom of the page, and I'm really going to focus here on columns B and C. And this is your debt capacity with no new revenue sources, just focusing on utilizing the funds that you already have in your budget and you're already transferring to the capital reserve. So just to be very clear, we haven't factored in any new or additional revenues going towards capital or debt service. This is the funds that you currently have in your budget that you can take and use to pay debt service on a going forward basis. If you were to do that in fiscal year 2020, based upon some assumptions, we've assumed a 20-year level principal financing. Level principal is the most conservative route that we would look to amortize the debt. It's a very conservative approach. We've assumed a 5% interest rate, which in today's market, you would be looking in the 3.5% to maybe 4% range. So we've got conservative debt structure, conservative interest rate. We do go out 20 years, which is the max we would want to amortize governmental debt in North Carolina, but for a longer term project like a park, I think that makes sense. We may end up somewhere in the 15 to 20 year range. So I think our assumptions here are fairly conservative, and based upon those assumptions, in fiscal year 2020, you could issue debt of about $5.8 million to fund a project, or multiple projects if you choose to go that route. For perspective, in column C, we've also shown 5.8 million that can do a lot of projects. Maybe you want to spread it out over multiple years. And so if you spread it out evenly over the next 5 years, and you could do 2.5 million, 2.5 million, and 2.5 million in fiscal 20, 22, and 24. So depending upon, you know, where we come out with these various assumptions on interest rate and term, and where you come out on the timing of the issuance, we're looking at a range of about 5.8 to about $7.5 million of capacity that you have utilizing only existing revenues, no new revenues dedicated to debt service. If you were to find additional revenues in your budget or come up with new revenues, that capacity obviously increases. We've shown you that in columns D and E and F and G. If you were to come up with the equivalent of 1 penny or $200,000, give or take, or the equivalent of 2 pennies or $400,000, give or take, how that impacts or increases your capacity. You know, new or additional revenues mean more capacity if you use those to fund debt service. But again, very high level, you have capacity and you have the affordability within your current budget to fund debt in fiscal year 2020 and or beyond for capital projects. And I think that's one of the, I know sometimes for me, I talk through this a lot, and I talk through a lot of the information and provide a lot of different scenarios, but I thought it would be helpful to maybe just boil it down as you're looking to make decisions on Parks and Rec master plan, specific projects, or other capital projects. You can fund 5.8 to 7.5 million of debt, and it's important to note that is your capacity for new capital projects. We're already counting on funding what I'm calling your existing projects, Waxhaw Fields and the Public Services Facility. Those are taken care of with your current revenues. Haven't funded those through the debt issuance yet, but we've set those revenues aside. This 5.8 to 7.5 million is new capacity over and above those existing projects.
So what do you mean we've set the revenue aside?
In our modeling, we have already factored those in. So those revenues are part of the funds that are being transferred into the capital reserve fund. 650,000. We've said in our calculations here, we've said we need to set some of that aside to fund these projects that are ongoing. What could we do on top of those projects?
So I thought at one point we had talked about maybe having to borrow for the YMCA fields.
We are.
So we still talk. Yeah.
So if
that's where I'm getting a little bit confused.
Let me restate that. I should have said that a little more clearly. In our modeling, we're assuming that you're going to borrow $2.8 million, $2.79 million for the Waxhaw Fields project.
And we can afford that in our budget.
You can afford that.
Gotcha.
And $700,000 for the Public Services Facility. You can afford that. That's built in. We factored those in, and then we looked at what was left over within your existing budget. And those dollars that are left over after funding Waxhaw Fields and Public Services Facility, that's what's giving you the capacity of 5.8 to $7.5 million.
So basically what that means is the last year our budget had $650,000 transferred into capital reserve. So if we were to immediately issue debt for all those things, instead of a $650,000 transfer, part of that $650,000 would be our new debt service payment. So that's why he's saying we have the capacity. We're already doing it. We're already setting that aside. So that's kind of in summary. And I also, if I could add, in layman's terms, when he says no new revenues, that means no tax increase. So we can do this right here with no tax increase.
Again, based upon the decisions that you all have done and the saving you all have done in prior budgets, kudos to y'all. That's what's giving you this capacity. You've really been able to follow that plan and set yourselves up to consider funding these projects.
I'd mention also a couple caveats Mitch talked about on the financing assumptions. There are also couple assumptions on what the fields would cost and what public services perhaps would cost. So 2 caveats there is neither project has been bid. One project has been mostly designed. The other project hasn't been designed at all. So that is a number, a working number, but it really doesn't represent site topography, whatever we find on a potential site. So,
And that's Public Works.
public services.
Yeah, or public services.
So, and I know, Lisa, you put together some slides, basically, and this is maybe on your screen, and it's up on the screen up here, but basically, in fiscal year 20, these are those major projects that we talked through, the YMCA fields, public services, and park project or projects to be determined. You could choose to fund up to $5.8 million. Thinking back to our municipal finance discussions, how municipal finance is done in North Carolina, remember, we can't borrow money or issue the debt until we have bids in hand. We have to get local government commission approval. That's the oversight body in Raleigh. They have to approve our debt, and in order for them to make the findings that they have to make to approve your debt, one of the big things we need to do is show them that our borrowing is adequate but not excessive. And in order to do that, we need to be able to show them, here's our bids, and this is what we're borrowing to fund based upon this bid. So, depending upon how long the design process takes, maybe this debt would be issued in fiscal year 20, or maybe it gets started and you start work. You maybe have some design payments in fiscal year 2020. But the actual debt may not be issued until fiscal year 21 or beyond when you have the bids in hand. One of the tools that you have at your disposal to help bridge that gap is a reimbursement resolution. And so you all, when you start a project, can adopt a reimbursement resolution where you basically say, we want to move forward with this project and we are reserving the right to fund this project through a tax-exempt debt issuance. And we can, any expenses that we make until the time where we issue debt, we're going to be able to reimburse ourselves from those debt proceeds. So, you may choose to use some of this annual $650,000 or other fund balances that have been built up to help cover some design or preliminary expenses until you get to the point where you can bid the project and issue the debt. So again, I just say kudos to y'all for having a very solid fund balance and having this $650,000. That's going to give you some flexibility to get started on projects and get them to the point where you can issue debt. Not everybody's in that position, and funding, several $100,000s of design fees can be a challenge before you're able to issue debt. And you all have set yourselves up nicely to be able to handle those costs before you get to the point where you can actually issue the debt to fund the project. So I think you're in very good shape to be considering debt funding of capital projects on multiple levels.
So it would seem to me, or seem to be a pragmatic step for us to get our more complete list of potential CIP items.
Yeah, and so
I mean, those were examples that you had. I know the one from January had streetscapes, sidewalks, the Waxhaw Parkway, those kind of things. And we've never talked about them, which is understandable because we're still trying to get to this point. So would that seem like a logical next step?
Yes, sir. So, and we sketched out some here on the screen, working with Greg and Lisa, sketched out some next steps as part of the CIP process. So I think one of the big ones is finalize that park master plan, know what projects within that plan, know what that plan fully looks like, and then start to think about what projects within that plan you want to do. Continue to fund that CIP program, that capital reserve, and as part of this year's budget and ongoing budgets. That's going to continue to give you that flexibility. And then, like you said, choose, we've said choose park projects, but if there's other projects as well you want to use on your debt capacity on, select those projects.
I'm sorry,
No, that's okay. Select those projects that you want to fund, or that you want to pursue, and then staff and ourselves can work to formulate a financing plan, what we call plan of finance or a financing plan, which is going to be some combination of pay-as-you-go capital, cash funding, and debt funding for you all to consider. Again, one of the tools you'll have there is to consider using some excess fund balance over your 40% target to fund planning, design expenditures. And then once we have that, present you with that plan of finance, you adopt a plan of finance, we would say, let's revisit those debt policy guidelines. Because if we're going to use debt as a tool to fund a CIP within a plan of finance, we want to make sure we're doing it in a responsible fashion. And those debt policies kind of set targets for us or set limits for us on the amount of debt that we're going to issue within certain ratios. And I think that gives a lot of people, lenders, the LGC, other interested parties, that gives them a lot of comfort that when you're issuing debt, you're doing it within a responsible fashion and within a framework that you all have considered and adopted. And then along with those financial policies, like I said, the reimbursement resolution I think is going to be important as you start to fund those preliminary expenditures, maintaining your flexibility to go back and do a tax-exempt debt issuance in the future to reimburse yourselves. So once we get all of that done, that's all part of that financing plan or plan of finance. Once all that is done, you get your bids in hand, then we're implementing that plan of finance. We're starting to issue debt, fund projects, and once we have the debt, you award the contract, then you're really moving forward and starting to put shovels in the ground. So that's a long time shown in sort of one slide, but I do think a lot of this, if you wanted to, a lot of this could get started and get pretty far down the way in fiscal year 2020. It all depends on how quickly you all as a board want to move in determining projects and get the process started.
Comments?
The only thing I had was at what point are we going to be discussing the this possible debt here, the park project? Because I wasn't aware that we had determined that was where we were going to do.
It isn't. I think they were using that as an example, right?
Okay.
I think that's because the original from January CIP had roughly $5 million sitting there, so project to be determined. So they're just using that as an example. That's not a definitive. I don't think that's what you were implying.
That's
correct.
Projects are at y'all's discretion.
Yeah.
I just, knowing that you're working on the park master plan, seem to tie all in together.
Yeah, just to put these are sequential. So the first to do is finalize the park master plan. Then the budget to dos are look at funding the CIP program again as part of the budget process. Then at the board's discretion and timing, you decide when you want to choose a park projects or other capital projects, whether they be roads or whatever. Then once the project is identified, we can start working on development cost. What will it cost to engineer it? What will it cost to prepare a site? Then we start kind of working into a financing plan. We have a order of magnitude on the cost. That gives us a goal for what it's going to take to do the project design. And because these projects are multiple years in nature most often, I mean, there's very few projects that we're going to fund from a debt capacity standpoint that are not going to be at least 12 to 18 to 36 months. These are big projects and they have big price tags, but they also take time to develop. And so there will be preliminary design. So after the board comes up with a concept for a project, there'll be discussion as to what's in the scope. So we'll have a scoping discussion that says this project may have 4 different components that will make up the scope. It'll be an exercise to determine what it'll take to design the scope, and then what that cost, and then ultimately there would be a budgetary number pulled together for construction. So it could include acquisition if there's additional parcels that would be needed, or right-of-way that would be needed. So all that gets rolled into that ultimate number that's placed in the financing plan that you use the reimbursement resolution as a tool. So parts of that can happen ahead of knowing the final cost. So if you're working on design, small acquisition, whatever that might be, you can do that ahead of time, expend funds, and then when the ultimate financing and ultimate funding plan comes together, you have the ability to go back and to recoup those funds. A lot of these projects, what you'll see is they'll have some contribution as pay-as-you-go. So up front, you might identify some funds that would be used to start the planning process, and you may decide as a board that you don't want to try to have those project costs reimbursed in financing. On the other hand, it's quite common and legitimate to do that and try to roll the entire cost into the financing plan. There's different ways to approach it. Some communities, once they are reimbursed those planning funds, they then take those planning funds, add them back into the fund balance, and use that to continue planning the next project down the road. So it's kind of a rolling tool to say, we know we're going to have to spend money to start a project, and we can't go to the LGC until we bid it. So we know out of the gate there's always going to need to be a pot of money to plan a project. And so we're going to use that as a rolling fund to be our project planning cash reserve.
Yeah, and you all are in an enviable position with regard to that, having funded this plan over the last several years and having a strong fund balance to be able to do that. And as you look at a multi-year CIP, as Greg said, there may be multiple projects in different stages of planning. So, you know, the idea with using the reimbursement resolution is you may be just starting on one and haven't made any expenditures. You may be in the middle of expending your planning money on another, and you may have just finished designing a third project and ready to finance that project. And so when you finance that project, if you utilize your reimbursement resolution, those planning dollars then go back to that project that's just starting the planning phase to help cash flow those design expenditures.
So I wanted to give you a little bit more detail on that one bullet point that says consider use of excess fund balance over 40%. So as of the end of June 30th, 2018, we had 42%. So we have 2% over our goal, which is a good thing. But basically what we could do is transfer 2% out and use that as seed money for the planning process. We could also use the $650 if we wanted to. It'd be up to you, but we could set that aside, say in a project starting fund, and spend $250,000. I think that's probably what the 2% is. So you start out and you do the engineering and plan review and all that sort of stuff, and then when you get the loan, you pay yourself back that initial $250, and then you take that $250 out and you start the next project. So we're not using our fund balance like as in spending it. We're just using it temporarily and then using it as seed money over and over again.
So on the 23rd, will we get a robust list of capital improvement projects, a la what you were working on in January? Roads and things like that?
We will, and think about it this way, that we will not have a STP list that says this is what we're going to do in each year, but we will have the ability to fund some STP projects in each of the out years. We'll have the ability to, and we'll show what we are already funding and then what the capacity is. So we will likely have a line on that CIP sheet that says, just like this one, projects, and the amount that can be financed, but not a project, because the board hasn't weighed in on hadn't completed the master plan A and then B weighed in on what project or projects to start. There will likely be some projects, or at least one, that may not be on the sheet that was on there last year because we are working on alternate plans to do it differently. We had a placeholder last year. I think we may have some discussion later, but one of the projects is kind of moving in a different direction, so it might not be a capital cost and it might be a lease cost.
How difficult would it be for Matt to do some type of estimate on a sidewalk project to complete sidewalks around town? Is that something that could be on that list?
So an engineer can give you a linear cost per foot of sidewalk, but what they can't give you is the right-of-way acquisition cost. So he could give you a pretty good number for what it would cost to construct a yard of concrete sidewalk that's X number of feet wide, but he's not going to be able to give you a good estimate without knowing whether that could be donated right-of-way or whether we have the right-of-way already, or donated easement, or whether the right-of-way exists, so we'd have to have a specific location. He can give you some ballpark numbers, but
pretty good prioritization. Covers a lot of incidentals as a part of how we got to that priority. So if it's already in that list, you can get it pretty quick to the point if there are some incidentals that specific to everybody, just have placeholders so they can affect the timeline and the cost kind of outside of those specific issues.
Because I think that would be interesting to see. It's a possible project that could kind of coordinate between the Parks and Rec and just a transportation model, because I know that the walkability and the trails and greenway was important to the citizens, so it would be kind of a project that could fit both needs. So it's an idea.
I know the plan that we had, to your point, had $1 million on it for sidewalks. Over the course of 2021 and 22, had roughly 3.6 for the parkway on the southwest side as something we may do. The downtown streetscape over 3 years was 2.5, in addition to the $5 million each year, so to speak, for to be determined projects. So thus the question of, if we're getting a full list, we'll be able to go through it and actually ascertain, you know, what do we want to put $1 or $1 million on sidewalks? And then to Matt's point, he's got the list. I'm assuming that's where do we want to focus, and then you guys can do the real engineering work around it.
the other thing too I would kind of point out is that the last CIP list or two included some discussion about the timing of a bond referendum.
Yep.
And we're not talking about the timing right now of a bond referendum, although that could change, but there's not a date that's out in the future that's being actively moved toward as far as starting a bond referendum process. And if you recall, most of those out-year projects, the only way they would get funded would be with a bond referendum. That is a different discussion than what Mitch is having, because what we're talking about tonight is existing capacity, existing tax rate, existing funds. A bond referendum becomes a different discussion, because you really have to start talking about if a number is large, how do you fund it? And it really includes disclosure and some robust discussion about what that could do with the tax rate and when. And that becomes then a real timing issue, and some assumptions have to be made as to when that type of debt is issued, which is usually much longer, because you have 7 years. Once the bond referendum is approved, if it is approved, there's a 7-year clock that starts ticking to issue that debt. So you generally stagger those issuances during that time frame. That is an entirely different discussion than really kind of what we're talking about tonight, which is the capacity that we have today to do what would primarily, what would be a bank loan. So different, not a GO loan, not GO debt rather, but bank loan.
And one of the things within the difference between GO bond referendum and an installment financing contract, which is kind of like a bank loan. If you remember back, I know I keep referencing back to it, but that municipal finance overview, an installment financing contract is secured by a deed of trust on real property. So you provide a security interest in property, whereas the GO bond is a full faith and credit pledge of the taxing power of the town. So you don't have to have any security, no property. And typically, GO bonds work much better for things like sidewalk projects or road, street projects, because think about it from a lender's perspective, the banks really are looking for more essential or more property to take as security. You know, in years past, we did many an installment financing contract secured by concrete or asphalt. And then 2008, 9, and 10 happened, and suddenly municipal bankruptcies occurred, and all of a sudden collateral or property securing loans became much more important. Not in North Carolina, no issues in North Carolina, but nationally, just kind of spooked banks where, and regulatory agencies where now banks have to do a lot more due diligence on the collateral or the security they're taking for a loan under an installment financing contract. So that's why a lot of times we see streets, sidewalks, projects getting done as general obligation bonds. And things, honestly, like police station, town hall, fire station, public works facility, those are the real bread and butter of installment financing, bank loans. Parks are kind of in the middle. You're getting property, you're able to give real property as security, but on the meter of essentiality according to banks, they fall below town hall, police station, fire station. There's banks who will do it. We've done a number over the years, and so I don't think that that's a non-starter. I think when you start moving more towards a street and a sidewalk project, your options for bank financing get pretty slim at that point in time.
So we kind of took those projects off because at the moment the GO wasn't being discussed. So what we kind of put on there was what we thought was on the current horizon, just for this illustration. But we can add back those other larger projects, street and sidewalk projects, on another sheet.
Well, and I don't mean that as a criticism that they're not on. I understand what you're doing in terms of an example. You've highlighted our capacity, but our list, we got to handle the list too. And how do we look at that over the next 5 years, the list and the different sources? If we need a public services facility, we can't ignore that. We can't spend all our money on a current project and ignore that. We have to look at it from the standpoint of how are we going to do that plus a current project, whatever it may be it a sidewalk or whatever. And that we just don't have the list in front of us completed yet. And that's part of the budget process. So.
Yes, sir. And that was where,
yeah,
in our conversations, the idea was we thought it would be helpful when you're talking about those projects. What is our capacity? You know, if you've got a list of $40 million worth of projects,
right,
doesn't necessarily fit this capacity very well. So you kind of got to, knowing your capacity hopefully is helpful when you're looking at the list and saying what projects we want to start with. How does
well,
that
if you just
fit
go by the
with our
park master plan, the draft, we basically cover a third of it. If we just spend it all on parks, if that's what we wanted to do as a board, that's it.
And so,
and so that thus the decision making that we have to go through.
Exactly, and hopefully this is a tool. The hope was this
an eye opener.
Be a tool for you all as you're looking at those projects to understand what is our capacity based on just our current budgeting practices. What can we do, and then And what projects do we want to do with that? And then are there still projects on the list that are important and we need or want to do? Then the question will be, are there new revenues or are there existing revenues that can be used to fund those, or do new revenues need to be identified to fund those projects if we want to undertake them within the CIP?
So just changing the subject a little bit, I've been through it once, but maybe the two of you could, the length of time it takes to go through the LGC process. It's not an overnight process, so set expectation.
So it depends where you are in the process with your borrowing. But let's just say, let's say you're in the design process and you've gotten all your preliminary work done, and let's say we're 6 to 9 months away from bidding a project. That's when we really want to start getting serious about the LGC financing process. About, call it, 6 months ahead of getting those bids and getting LGC approval, we probably want to be sitting down or getting on the phone with the LGC, filling them in on where we are with the project, talking through it with them, getting their thoughts on the project, and developing sort of an agreed upon plan of finance with them and ourselves being the town. And then at that point in time, we're kind of in the mode of preparing ourselves to do the financing. And let's take the bank loan, for instance. We're going to be developing a request for proposal that gets distributed to various banks, and distribute that RFP, assist the banks with their due diligence process, and then about 45 to 60 days before we want to close on the financing, we'll get those bank proposals in hand. Around that same time, we need to do some preliminary steps for the LGC. We need to submit some application items that they require between 45 and 30 days before their approval. And then we'll be working with them through the application process. About 30 days before LGC approval, we will have gone through the bank bids, the bank proposals, selected a bank that we want to move forward with. We'll get our project bid in hand, and we'll be able to share with the LGC, and working with their staff and your staff, be able to share with the LGC, here's what the financing looks like. This is what we would like for you to consider for approval. And so, that's about 30 days, call it 3 weeks ahead of their approval. And then they're going to meet on the first Tuesday of every month, and they'll consider your approval. And then if we're doing a bank loan, about 10 days to 2 weeks later, we'll close on the financing. So really, the process gets started around about 6 to 9 months before LGC approval is sort of the planning process. But really, the key actions all come together and coalesce in that last 60 to 90 days. But it's not something where, we can say in August we're ready to issue debt. We want to issue debt in September to get started on a project. It doesn't work that way. We've got to have a lead time. And so what we typically do is coordinate with staff, coordinate with you all, coordinate with project consultants at the outset of a project. So when you select an architect, an engineer, a construction manager at risk, we like to see what does that preliminary project schedule look like, and then let's layer in our financing items on that schedule. It'll be a separate schedule, but layer in our financing items so you all know what to expect as you're progressing through the project schedule. Okay, we're getting to the point where we need to start doing this task for the financing, and then we know our next task is going to be this.
But the project would not really be impacted because we would bring to you a reimbursement resolution, and so it would really be kind of seamless. You wouldn't even know what we're working on behind the scenes of doing that. One of the things, though, that the board would want to do would be several debt policies that we would want to base on the project size that we're about to undertake.
Yeah, and I think it's kind of talking about a specific project in that example, but certainly I think at the outset, once you start nailing down your projects and you start selecting your projects, we can really lay out a plan that says, okay, here's the projects we want to do, and here's how it fits within our capacity, and this is going to be our plan. It's not set in stone. Things evolve, things change, but this is our plan. And based upon the plan, here's what our projections look like for our key debt ratios and our debt affordability. And based upon those projections, that's really going to provide you all with the guidance and the information you need to set reasonable limits for your policies. Because, you know, policies, there's a wide range of policies. And, you know, if you don't have any perspective, you may say, we're going to start at the very lowest or most conservative rate on our policies. Whereas, you know, a policy that's maybe a percentage point higher is still a very good and very conservative policy, but it's going to give you a little more room to accomplish a plan that you want to accomplish. So we recommend setting your policies in conjunction with establishing that plan of finance, so you don't unnecessarily set policies that you're going to potentially break if you want to accomplish the projects that you choose.
So we already know we're contractually obligated to the YMCA fields. Are we starting that process? I mean, that 9-month process you went through.
Right, we have, because if you remember, we do have cash already set aside. So right now, I think there's about $900 and something thousand of cash left. And I think Dena or Greg could tell you where we are kind of in that process with the land.
If we got to go borrow money, are we starting the financing process, or when would we start that?
We would, well, whenever the project gets a little more defined, then we would, like he said, go out and get bids and update our numbers. But whenever those come in, then we would come back to you and ask for a reimbursement resolution. The financing can come up to 18 months after that. So that project's not going to get held up by this whole process.
But just specifically to your point, yes, sir. We have started, and we actually started about 18 months ago, working with staff, trying to understand the timing, and timing evolves and changes. But right now, based upon the current best guess estimates of when bids will be in hand, we're kind of looking more towards a financing next spring at this point in time. So, you know, about a year from now, so we're a little early on in that process, but it's something we're keeping an eye on, we're tracking, we're staying up to date on, so that we know once we get a more definitive, here's our bid date, we can really get things cranked.
Could we use that to help us work through some of these policies that you talked about, that project?
Yes, sir. Well, certainly in conjunction with that. But again, I also think finalizing the park master plan and developing the projects that you want to fund, Waxhaw Field certainly being one of them, but having a defined list of projects.
Absolutely.
These are our priorities. I think that's going to be the biggest driving factor of working on this policy.
Let me speak to that project timing a little bit, because the good thing about the Waxhaw Fields project is that the commitment's been there for a number of years, and so the engineering's been underway. The land acquisition was underway several years ago. The project development cycle has been moving down the pathway the whole time. Where the challenge will be is trying to get to a point with public services facility that one can be spun up quickly, and ideally can be bundled with the field financing. That's the perfect solution there, scenario, is to put those together. It may not work out that way, but ideally it would be you'd bundle those two projects together. May or may not have another project that could be bundled with those at that time, but you don't really want to do small issuances if you can avoid it. If you have to, you do, but if you can avoid it, you use your reimbursement resolution or some other timing method to help you get to an appropriate time to issue the debt, so that you're bundling a couple of those together. So we've got plenty of time still with the Waxhaw Fields. We have time for the public services, but we if we run into a 9-month window where nothing happens with public services, then those two projects won't be on the same track.
And on the bundling, do you want to talk a little bit about, like, we want to do that for better rates and to get more banks to bid. Some banks may not want to bid on an athletic field. They may not want to have an athletic field for collateral. So having the public services building as an add-on collateral helps us get more banks to respond to our RFP and hopefully get a better rate.
That's exactly right. Going back to the conversation with the installment financing and essentiality of collateral, being able to pair a governmental building, a governmental project, they're all governmental, but actually a governmental building with a park probably is a little more attractive to some banks than just having a park or an athletic field. So to the extent we can group things like that together, that's what we try to do. And the funds that have been set aside for Waxhaw Fields already kind of provide you that flexibility to keep that project moving, really even to the point where you could get past the receipt of bids and keep that project moving and wait on the public services facility so long as they're reasonably close to one.
Any other questions?
I wanted to clarify a little bit too on the CIP. One of the reasons we kind of wanted Mitch to come back was to give us some clarity as we go into the operating budget, because we wanted to talk about the importance of that 650, and we also wanted to let you have that $5.8 million number as you're looking at the projects and finalizing the park master plan. One of the things on the 23rd, really we're bringing you the operating budget. And I really don't want to get the cart before the horse, because I think you guys have to tell us what you want to do with the park master plan before we develop a more robust CIP, because we can't put those projects on there unless you guys have gone through that process. So I was waiting on the park master plan to be finalized, and then I thought we could get maybe a separate meeting to talk about CIP in detail, because then we've got a lot to talk about on the 23rd, just the operating budget, and then maybe we could set aside another more detailed if we want to, to get your feedback on the priorities of all the other things, and we could add the things that you all want us to add, like sidewalks, and get better estimates.
Well, I just want to make sure we're clear on one thing. It's not what we want to add. We need a needs list from staff. I mean, we need to see what it is that you as subject matter experts are really telling us are the needs. And then that list may be 40 million, like you said, maybe 30, maybe 20, but we know the parks is going to be a big chunk just from the master plan estimate, and then we have to prioritize from that.
Let me make a note about that. Those are really two different things. A needs list is going to be determined by the length of years that we're looking out. So that's going to be a different horizon perhaps than a CIP. Our CIP really looks at about a 5-year time frame, and it looks at kind of a theoretical way to finance or pay as you go that capital list. A needs list might be 10 years or longer in length, and it's going to be based on things like growth of the town, need for facilities. So it's going to go beyond the horizon of the CIP. What we bring as a CIP discussion is what impacts the next coming year operating budget. So what project specifically would get started in the next fiscal year that you would have to spend dollars on for engineering, acquisition, planning, or what project would you need to have debt service earmarked in that budget, specifically in a line that says debt service for X project. That's what is referred to as first year capital. So it's first year of the CIP. That's the year that you're really utilizing the CIP planning document to inform the operating budget with. The CIP then comes back annually at least, but there is absolutely nothing that prohibits the board from amending or changing the CIP mid-year, midstream. That often happens in the form of there's a project that you want to get added to the CIP because that makes it eligible for some other source of funding, i.e. a grant or CRTPO dollars that could be allocated to it. And so sometimes there's a requirement that it's in your local CIP before you can apply for other funding. And so municipalities often mid-year, midstream say, here's a project that's kind of popped up, we want to add it to the CIP. It indicates a level of commitment to that particular project. It doesn't guarantee that you're going to do it, but it says to the agency that you're talking to and to your residents and to banks, these are projects that are on our short-term window, and we're actively working on to try to figure out how to bring them forward. A different list completely, though, from what is our 10-year need, what is our 15-year need, which is that huge number, which we're not going to be able to develop really an effective financing plan for, because you're looking at that long-term approach to it.
Yeah, but let me challenge a little bit there, because we've had the discussion about town hall, and town hall's a big ticket item, could be in 7 years. I think it's responsible on our part to look out to, is that a big ticket number, because that's a big debt capacity, and how does that factor into all the things we want to do? I'm not trying to come up with the wish list as much as how do we responsibly make a decision so we don't take the 5.82 right now and then oops, we don't have any capacity to do anything without a tax increase, which is then forcing the hand of the citizens. I mean, all these things, it's complex, no question about it. And I'm not being critical as much as these things, there's a relationship, and how do we get there and I think that's really what you were getting at. How do we get there with, is it $1 million in sidewalks? Is it $500,000 or $250,000?
So here's another kind of a educational thing, I guess I'm going to call it, is what Mitch is talking about, what we're talking about today is capacity with no change in tax rate and no change in anything else. And so what does that mean? That means that we're assuming today that we're paying debt service on $5 million for a police station. That's rolling capacity that will roll off the books. That capacity will then give the town at that point in time an additional $5 million worth of capacity. An effective long-term debt strategy takes into account all those things, including the possibility that you could at some point refinance that debt or pay that debt off. That debt is extremely low, and so we'll probably never be able to find a refinancing tool that would bring it much lower. However, it may be at a certain point the town has the ability to pay that debt off, and we have that capacity that can then essentially double today what the capacity is that we're discussing, and be talking about 10.8 or a much larger number. We absolutely can work and refine and look at the work that's been done in the past, because there's been a lot of good work done, and the numbers are astounding. Some of the numbers are really operational capital. So there was some effort put toward looking at the number of police cars that were going to be needed over time. Those are things that are included in an operational budget, and we'll bring that forward as part of the normal growth in the tax rate. The capital that was reflected in the CIP, $1 million projects, big ticket things, there are assumptions that this board will make and future boards will make about the timing of all those projects, and they can absolutely change every 2 years, every year, frankly. What the exercise is this year and kind of for right now is the master plan is kind of the next task for the board to accomplish. The number that's reflected in the master plan is a big number for the need side, and so how do you get at that in an incremental approach? The first incremental approach is to say, what can we pay for today, and that's 5.8. The other two columns that are there show really what each penny on the tax rate generates today, so you can extrapolate that out and say, you know, if someone wanted to, 5 cents on the tax rate would give you additional capacity. We didn't want to go through the exercise because we think it's enough to say, you know, 1 or 2 projects at a time is the most that the staff in its current form can actually deliver from a capacity standpoint. So you know, we could work on a town hall, but we understand that one or two park projects or road projects probably puts the staff at capacity without bringing in a lot more hands on deck to really get it done. We are very cognizant, though, longer term, absolutely, we need a town hall. We need additional parks that aren't funded as part of this, and we need roads that hopefully we can continue to work with CRTPO to have other funding sources so that we're not funding them.
Yeah, and that's a good point. We'll talk about that at the budget, because the pay-as-you-go, pay-to-play plan that they've now implemented will have an impact on what we budget if we want to go after those things. And that's, it's not a bad plan, but if we want them, and I think 3 or 4 of our intersections popped up on the critical intersection list, which would say we're going to pay to go, pay as you play, I should say, not pay to go, pay as you go, pay to play. Everybody's playing. Anyway.
I may just add one other thing about looking out further on the horizon at capital projects. I absolutely think it's a smart thing to do. But a lot of times those projects and those needs are tied to growth, as Greg said. And so, you know, with growth and population and assessed value comes additional dollars coming in as part of your budget. So a strategy that a lot of people look at when thinking about longer term funding needs is that's a need if we have that growth in their budget, in your budget. So presumably, if your budget is growing to the point where you have a need for a lot of other major projects in the outer years, you're probably going to have more room in your budget than just the $650,000 that you're doing today too. So right now we're maximizing the $650,000, but if you double over the next 15 years and those needs become a reality, then maybe there's another $650,000 that you could find to dedicate towards debt service as well. So it's not necessarily, and I always say this, it's if you can find new or additional revenue, because it doesn't necessarily mean it has to come from a new penny. If you have the growth that's equivalent to a new penny, you can use that growth to help support capital projects as well. So I just wanted to make that clarification. I think that's an important thing to think about when looking longer term is what are the growth projections, or what's the growth potential, and how much will that help fund these capital projects that are tied to growth.
Lisa, Mitch, thank you. Thank you for bringing it forward. It's a good discussion. Next up, discussion on programming budget for parks and recreation in fiscal year 20.
Hello, everyone. All right, I'm going to go over our Park and Rec programming, and we brought kind of like an updated in August of this past year overview of programs and events. This is basically kind of like a refresher, and that kind of gets us ready for budget. I always like to put up our mission and vision to bring opportunity to our citizens for small and large group gatherings in a safe environment. This is one of the slides that I had in the August presentation. Basically, it kind of sets us up how the department was formed and how we've grown since that formation, and that we're moving forward at updating our actually master plan. Recreational programs. This highlights athletic, fitness, wellness, education, and small group gatherings. This also highlights some of the surveys that we did in the beginning with the master plan, and then other similar sizes of the communities about social activities, community partners, and then enrichment activities as well. And this winter, we brought forth the first play Waxhaw, which I'm very excited about. We will have our next one come out in July to December. I'm going to go through a few of the programs, and they're separated out by age groups. So we start off with our youth. Actually, tomorrow evening, we've got a mural painting at 8 Legs. So what we have done is basically partnered with our community businesses and artisans to bring forth classes and educational pieces to our residents. And our youth are from 6 to 12. Our teens are from 12 to 18. And this actually is the most sought out programs, is the teen programs, which I was really excited about. But this is just a sampling. Then we have adult night out, so adults can also come out and enjoy, interest, and just have a fellowship time. Then we saw the need for health and wellness for our citizens, and then that actually prompted us to do more partnerships with health and wellness. So we started adult fitness and senior fitness. The senior fitnesses are doing good. The adult fitness, not as high as on the survey as they said they wanted, so that's going to take a little more prodding to get everybody to come out and get fit with us. Senior programs, on the other hand, is very popular. They love senior coffee. We have first Thursdays is more of our educational, health and fitness, art, social activities. Our third Thursday is our game day. So they come and have a social time. We have, coffee and treats. We're also implementing a senior trip days once a quarter, and we're getting good sign-ups for that as well. Fun days in the park. So we started this last summer. We did one a month. So I'm a little ambitious, so we're doing one every Wednesday this summer. So this is June. July and August will come out with the next program guide. But we highlight each park. So we'll rotate. We also rotate on time, because one of the questions that I got last summer is some moms and dads can't do morning, so we did an afternoon time as well. And so we'll rotate that as when we're available to be at that park. Fun days is in-house, so that would be instructed by Park and Rec staff or volunteers. So that's I just love fun days, so they're cool. Program, instructional, and fees. So the way we have it set up is 90% of our instruction programming is not, we pay out 90%. And 10% is more in-house, so that's like the Park and Rec staff. Programming is in both your income and expense budgeter. So remember when I talked about how it kind of balances out last time, where the participant pays in, and then a portion of that fee goes to the instructor. So it balances out the instructor fees for the budget. So just want to reiterate that, just so y'all understand that there is going to be offset cost that's going to happen in the expenditure line. Questions?
I have to congratulate you. You got Earl Cook to actually go contract with a private trainer.
He's doing a fitness. Yep.
Tracy?
My only question, for your indoor programs, where are you holding those at?
So, for example, you saw the teen where the Dream Dinners. We had it at Dream Dinners. So we partner up with the instructor in their facilities and actually have it there. Now, some of them are held at either the meeting place or the McDonald House, depending on the group size. But that's one of our goals, is actually to highlight our local businesses and instructors and artisans.
Commissioner Lee?
I saw up there that you have a self-defense class for the adults' night out. Have you considered doing one for teens? I spoke to a resident just today who said that her teen daughters were followed through the parking lot at Blakeney and absolutely terrified, and she was looking for a way to teach her young daughters how to protect themselves.
Thank you for that buy-in. June the 17th, we have a Teen Self-Defense Day.
Excellent.
Any other questions?
You answered my question.
Did you have a good turnout then?
For the teens and the seniors, we're not having an issue. The youth over the winter, we didn't have a lot of buy-in, but I think that's going to change with our summer and starting to fall. So that's something that the staff and I are definitely reevaluating how we program. And so programs go in cycles. And we've talked with our instructors, because this is new for our businesses as well. So it's just helping them understand that just because it doesn't work this season doesn't mean it doesn't work in another type of year, or who we're inviting or who we're kind of targeting. So it's a learning process. I told the team that it's probably going to take a year and a half at least for us to get this kind of ironed out, because our citizen base changes as well. So we have to keep that in mind as well. But it's a learning process, but I'm up for that challenge. I'm good.
Other questions? Thank you.
Thank you.
Animal control and dog licenses.
Proposing to do the dog licenses through Pet Data. This is a company that would help us with rehoming and compliance with vaccines with all the animals here in town. Right now, with the licensing program we currently have in place, we have very low participation in it. Approximately 10% of the residents are registering their animals. Right now, what we're proposing to do is we're going to do some public education. Pet Data will provide some information about why we should license our pets. They also help us come up with a little flyer that Officer West can hand out at different public events, such as First Fridays, when he does his rabies clinics. We try to do a registration here at the PD to get more people to register their animals. They will also assist us with coming up with an application process to where they'll help us design our own application on here, and people can renew the licenses online. This will take a lot of work off the town staff as it is. This also will help Officer West in the future by he'll have a database in there. So basically, the way it works now is I'm going to let him walk you through kind of what happens when he finds just a little puppy walking down the street. So West.
Hello, everybody. Basically, if I was to find, I'll just use a dog just for an example. That makes it easier. But I also do the same for cats. Okay, so if I was to find a dog, a whole process of actually getting that dog in possession of him to getting him home is approximately 3 to 4 hours of time that I put into it. If I was to retrieve a dog on 16 here, what I usually do is I take the dog and I bring him back here to the PD. I put him into the kennel. I'll photo it. I'll also check if there's a microchip using the chip reader that I have equipped with me. And if the dog does have a microchip, I'm able to get information pretty quick. I just make a phone call and then they give me the information, as long as the owner updated the chip reader. If not, then I have to continue my investigation. 90% of the time, unfortunately, there are no chips in these dogs. So I'm going to use the example as if there is no chip. I would bring him back, take a picture. I would put him on all social medias that we have here. We put him through Facebook, Nextdoor, everything. And we get a lot of shares from the community as well. And I'll leave him in the shelter feeding him, providing him walking and things like that. I would also make sure the dog is secured here, and I would go back out to the location where I had found the dog, and I would actually go knock on doors and try and find the owner. Kind of proud of myself. I probably have about an 80-85% success rate on finding the owner, but I do take about 3 to 4 hours to locate this dog, where his home is. If I cannot find the owner of the dog, I have to bring the dog to the shelter because I can't leave him here overnight. I wouldn't be able to sleep well at night. My head wouldn't be able to be secure on that pillow. But I'm going to make sure that he's at least going to be at the shelter where he does have adequate shelter and at least 24-hour surveillance on that particular dog. So I would have to wait until the end of my working day to get that dog back to the shelter. Basically, that's on one dog. While that one dog is 3 to 4 hours that I'm running around trying to find the owner of that particular dog, there are many stray and dogs that are out there. Right now, there's one running around because I'm sitting in here. So during that 3 to 4 hours, there are other animals that I could be out trying to find the homes and things of that nature, where this pet program, actually will help me a lot, and also the community as well.
So some of the neat things about this pet data company is they get a lot of their records off of the vets. So that helps out a lot with finding out if these animals have their vaccines and whatnot. So that our main goal is to make sure all these animals also have the rabies shots. We want to make sure the citizens are safe. So they go to the different vets because they have a large database, and that's where they get a lot of their information from. They also, we hope to improve the volume of the people registering, obviously. So what they'll also do, other than those flyers, once you register your animal, they'll send you a registration letter in the mail, and it'll have the town seal on it as well. But it'll be something similar to this. This is just a make-believe one that they send as a copy, just reminding you why you should register your dog, not just that it's a town ordinance, but the safety of your dog. Make sure that we know that it has its vaccines. Now, as far as the program goes, this is where it gets really neat, where he just said he wasted his entire day on a dog. What'll happen is he can go in there and he'll go little brown dog, and he'll populate little brown dogs. And then he can kind of narrow down. Say he found it in Millbridge, little brown dog in Millbridge, and he'll populate the little brown dogs in Millbridge. And it helps him narrow his search down a little bit so he can locate the owner of the animal. And that way when the kids get home from school, their puppy's there, they don't even know it was missing. So it would help us tremendously with a system like this. There are cities around using them, such as Matthews, Charlotte, and Nashville. I've used a lot. I've looked up their application forms, and they have a lot of neat information on their applications, which I propose to put on ours as well, such as possibly like a 3-year license. But there again, you can only get that if your animal has a 3 years rabies shot. So I mean, it's a really good system. We're hoping to save time and money, but eventually it'll build a database so much, it makes his job a whole lot easier.
So I think what I heard you say up front is you'll start with an education approach, which will get the community more aware and then hopefully increase the participation that way.
Yes, sir. We want to get the word out there. This is what we want to do and why it's important to register your pet. Again, they already have a lot of information. Officer West did go through a while back and came up with the 4 main reasons why you should get a license, and they have one very similar to that as well, why you should do it. But we want people to know that we're going to be going through this system. The thing is companies in Texas, okay? But what happens is they give us our own individual 800 number, so anybody paying their license, it just goes through this company. It'll come to us, but it goes through them. So when you see Texas, care of Irving, Texas on there, that's what it's about. But it's all coming to us. You have an individual 800 number on there. I was looking at the different applications, and all the phone numbers are different. So if he was to call as a citizen to register his dog, so they're going to answer Town of Waxhaw Animal Control and help them walk them through the process to register it. You're not going to be calling this number and them going, pet data, what can I do for you? So it's more of a personal touch, and it's all for us as a town.
Questions?
I was just going to say, to spin off of what you said, has anybody ever approached the local vets or the homeowners associations to have like a display out at least of the registration forms, just to promote
Yes,
registering?
ma'am. Officer West, I'll let him comment on it, but he's done a lot of that.
Yeah, I do a lot of that. I have a pretty good relationship with a lot of the vets here. I also make sure that of a point every spring, sometime it's actually getting to be that time, where I go to every single development and come down, talk to the animal control officer, come register your pets, come vaccinate your animals. I started that last year, and I got a pretty good response from it. Not as much as I kind of wanted to be, because I wanted to go also over the ordinances and things like that with a lot of people, which will help me with the call volume of that I also get, and explain a lot of the ordinances where they also understand what they can and cannot do. But I also did a lot of the registrations and vaccinations where a lot of the veterinarians would come down and want to participate and vaccinate the animals. So proactive is the key. And now I would be able to do it with this new licensing company, who I think would be a win-win.
Are most of the animals that you find strays, and you find the home, are they registered or not?
I only have one instance where it was an actual stray. There are animals out there that have been missing for a while, but even those dogs I was able to get home even after a week, and the owners were actually devastated to figure that the dog was gone. And to their surprise, I show up at their door with their dog, so they're very happy. So
But
a lot of people like me out there
Most of them are not registered, right?
Most of them are not registered, and that's what we're trying to change.
Thank you.
Wait, let me talk about the budgetary aspect of it, because in the timing. Currently, the revenues that are generated are about $6,000, in that range. The program itself will cost about $6,000, but with a 10% participation estimate right now, the program has the ability to continue to not only pay for itself, but to more than pay for itself. But really, the driving force here is the public safety aspect of it. There are animals that are not being vaccinated, and then the officer time involved with one animal really will lend itself to having to look at manpower issues in the future if we don't address what is today a legal ordinance that is a requirement. It's just not very well either known or adhered to. So that public education absolutely needs to be an important part of it. From a timing standpoint, we do need to get a head start on July 1st so that we can start that education process. The staff can work on the forms, the communication strategy that gets out. There would be a social media component of it, but also some newspaper components that really talk about what happens now when you do lose an animal, and then what the goals are of the program, and really kind of get that out there with a real coordinated approach to July 1st.
I think it's great. Kudos for the innovation. That's great. Other questions? Thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you.
All right, that covers everything for the work session, so we'll adjourn here at 5:45.